Welcome to Anonymous Stories, where we share stories from around the world. If you are just discovering us, support us by subscribing to this channel and liking this video. Now let's get into the story. If someone had told me that at 54 years old, after 30 years of marriage, my husband would look me in the eye and call me boring, I would have laughed in their face. Me? Boring? After raising 2 children, supporting his career, and building a life together? The word felt like a slap. But nothing could have prepared me for what Richard said next. I think it's time we bring Emily into the house. At first, I thought I'd misheard him. Surely, this was some warped attempt at a joke. But the way he sat there, sipping his whiskey as if he were discussing the weather, told me otherwise. I could barely breathe. Emily, his mistress, was 27 years old. She could have been our daughter, for heaven's sake. He continued, his tone devoid of any guilt or shame. You've been distant, Karen. And let's face it, things have gotten stale between us. Emily is exciting. She's full of life, and I think having her around could be good for all of us. Good for all of us? My mind was spinning. Did he think I was that naive? That desperate? But here's the part I'm ashamed to admit. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, as his words blurred together, a small, frightened voice in my head whispered, "What if you lose him?" I'd spent 3 decades building my life around Richard. I knew his moods, his quirks, the way he liked his coffee in the morning. I'd shaped myself into the perfect wife, or so I thought. If I pushed back too hard, would he leave me entirely? Would he pack up and start a new life with this young, beautiful woman? The thought terrified me. So I nodded. I agreed. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd figure out a way to make him see sense. But deep down, I knew I had just opened a door I could never close again. The day Emily moved in felt like a funeral for my dignity. She swept into the house with her perfectly manicured nails and designer bags, smiling like she'd won some grand prize. She even had the audacity to hug me. "Karen, it's so nice to finally meet you properly." Properly? As if meeting the woman whose husband she'd been sleeping with deserved pleasantries. From the moment she unpacked her things, the tension in the house was suffocating. I tried to keep my composure, but every interaction felt like a test of my endurance. Emily flitted around the house like she belonged there, while Richard acted as though this was the most natural arrangement in the world. Nights were the worst. The silence in our bedroom was deafening. Richard barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was with the casual indifference of a man who had already checked out. I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had come to this. It wasn't just the humiliation that kept me awake. It was the questions. When did I stop being enough for him? Was it my age? My body? Had I spent so many years giving him everything that there was nothing left of me? The truth was hard to swallow. I had sacrificed so much for this man. I'd put his needs, his ambitions, his happiness above my own at every turn. And now, in the house we had built together, I was reduced to a silent bystander in my own life. But the worst part? I wasn't sure if I hated Emily more for her brazenness, or myself for letting this happen. That first week felt like walking through a storm with no shelter in sight. Every moment was a reminder of how far I had fallen from the life I thought I had. But even as I tried to keep the peace, a small spark flickered inside me. I didn't know it yet, but that spark would soon ignite into something I hadn't felt in years: resolve. Let me tell you something, there's a difference between being gracious and being a doormat. And every day with Emily in my home blurred that line further than I ever thought possible. She was charming, I'll give her that. Too charming. She had this way of smiling that felt both disarming and condescending, like she was playing some private game only she knew the rules to. She always called me Karen, dear, as if I were a fragile old woman she needed to humor. At first, I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. I told myself that her constant hovering over Richard, a too sweet compliment about my cooking, and her habit of leaving her things scattered around the house were just her being young and thoughtless. But it wasn't just thoughtlessness, it was a subtle reminder, over and over again, that she was comfortable in a place I was beginning to feel like a stranger. One evening, I walked into the living room to find Emily bent over Richard's desk, her manicured fingers flipping through a stack of papers. She looked up with a startled smile, clutching the documents as though she'd been caught red-handed. "Oh, Karen, you scared me," she said, laughing nervously. "I was just looking for some receipts. Richard said I could take care of a few errands for him." I didn't say anything, but something about the way she quickly stuffed the papers back into the drawer didn't sit right with me. Receipts? Those didn't look like receipts, they looked like bank statements. And it wasn't just the financial documents. There were the late-night phone calls too. I'd hear her soft, hushed voice drifting from her room at odd hours, speaking in tones that weren't meant to be overheard. "Yes, I've got it under control," she'd say. Or, "Just wait. It's only a matter of time." I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something was off. During this time, I found an unexpected ally in Paul, my neighbor. Paul and I had always exchanged pleasantries over the fence, but with Richard and Emily occupying the house, I found myself lingering during our chats. There was something about Paul that felt grounding. He had this quiet kindness, the sort of presence that made you feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, I confessed to him, in the vaguest terms, that things at home had been complicated. "You know, Karen," he said, leaning on the fence with a thoughtful look, "people only treat you as badly as you allow them to." His words hit me like a brick. I'd spent so long convincing myself that enduring Richard's betrayal was the only way to keep my life intact. But was it really a life worth keeping if it meant losing every shred of self-respect? Paul didn't press me for details, but his kindness made me realize how desperately I needed someone in my corner. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't dared to feel, hope. But hope didn't erase suspicion. The more I observed Emily, the clearer it became that she wasn't the harmless, carefree young woman she pretended to be. Her charm was calculated, her every move deliberate. She was like a cat, circling her prey with a deceptively playful air. And Richard? He didn't seem to notice a thing. Or maybe he just didn't care. One evening, I decided to test my theory. I left the house, pretending to visit a friend, but parked my car down the street and walked back to the house quietly. Through the window, I saw Emily in Richard's office again, her eye scanning a document in her hands. She looked serious, focused, nothing like the bubbly girl she presented herself to be. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's presence in our home wasn't just about Richard's midlife crisis. There was something else at play, something I needed to figure out. And for the first time in weeks, I felt more than just despair. I felt determination. I'd always thought of myself as a trusting person. Maybe too trusting. For years, I gave Richard the benefit of the doubt, believing his work trips, his late nights, and even the way he had slowly pulled away from me were just the ebb and flow of a long marriage. But living under the same roof as Emily taught me something important: trust has limits. The turning point came when I noticed Emily's habits weren't just peculiar, they were deliberate. Her midnight phone calls, her frequent trips into Richard's office, and the way she always seemed to be sweet-talking him into something had set my nerves on edge. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. And for the first time in a long time, I decided to trust mine. It started innocently enough. One afternoon, when Emily left the house for one of her mysterious appointments, I slipped into her room. It was a strange feeling, standing in her space. Everything about it screamed youth and extravagance, the designer perfumes lined neatly on the dresser, the silk scarves tossed carelessly on a chair, and the glossy magazines featuring headlines about wealth and power. I felt like a trespasser, but my unease was outweighed by my need for answers. It didn't take long to find them. Tucked into the back of her closet, hidden beneath a pile of clothes, was a leather-bound journal. I hesitated, my hands trembling as I opened it. The entries painted a chilling picture. Emily had been involved with several older, wealthy men before Richard. Each relationship followed the same pattern: charm, intimacy, and manipulation. One entry caught my eye, a detailed plan to encourage a previous partner to revise his will, only to leave him once the changes were finalized. My stomach turned. She wasn't here for Richard. She was here for what he had. The next part of my investigation was riskier. I needed to know if Emily had already started working on Richard. Late one night, while Richard was asleep and Emily was out, I slipped into his office. My hand shook as I opened his desk drawer. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for: legal documents. Among them was a draft of a new will. I scanned it, my heart pounding with every line. It was all there: Emily listed as a beneficiary, her share of Richard's estate alarmingly significant. My breath caught in my throat. How could he do this? How could he be so blind? I confronted Emily the next day. She was lounging in the living room, scrolling through her phone with an air of smug entitlement. I stood in the doorway, my fists clenched, and summoned every ounce of courage I had. "I know what you're doing," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Emily didn't even flinch. She looked up at me, a small, amused smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, Karen," she said, setting her phone down. "What exactly do you think you know?" I told her. About the journal. About the will. About her past. For a moment, she stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then she laughed, a soft, condescending sound that made my blood boil. "You're so predictable," she said, standing up and walking toward me. "You think you're the hero in this little story, don't you? But let's be honest, Karen. You're nothing but a relic. Weak. Powerless. Richard doesn't love you anymore. He barely even notices you. Why do you think I'm here?" Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see it. "You might think you've won," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger, "but you have no idea who you're dealing with." She smirked, brushing past me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. That night, I sat in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Emily's dismissal stung, but it also ignited something in me. She thought I was powerless. She thought I'd sit back and let her destroy everything I'd built. She was wrong. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. If Emily wanted a game, I was ready to play, and this time, I was going to win. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that timing is everything. And as much as I hated confrontation, I knew this one had to be public. If Richard wanted to bring his betrayal into the light of day by inviting his mistress into our home, then it was only fitting for the truth to be revealed in the same way. I decided the perfect stage would be the dinner party. A small gathering of friends and business associates, all dressed to the nines, sipping wine and exchanging polite laughter. Richard thrived in these settings, basking in the glow of admiration. Tonight, I would turn that glow into a spotlight. As the guests arrived, I played my part to perfection. I greeted everyone warmly, complimented their outfits, and even engaged in light banter. Emily, draped in a sleek red dress that practically screamed "Look at me," stayed close to Richard, whispering in his ear and casting smug glances my way. I let her. Dinner was a lavish affair. Richard spared no expense, and the dining room sparkled with crystal glasses and polished silverware. As the courses were served, I bided my time, letting the conversation flow naturally. I wanted them all relaxed, unsuspecting. And then, as dessert was being brought out, I struck. "Before we continue," I said, setting down my glass of wine and rising from my chair, "I have something important to share with all of you." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, including Richard's. His expression was one of mild curiosity, while Emily's froze, her fork suspended in midair. "I think it's time we all got to know Emily a little better," I began, my voice calm but steady. "After all, she's become such a prominent figure in Richard's life." Richard stiffened, his eyes narrowing in warning. Emily's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, her voice saccharine as she said, "Oh, Karen, you're too kind." I ignored her and reached for the folder I'd hidden under my chair. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it and began pulling out the documents, photocopies of her journal entries, her correspondence with past lovers, and, most damning of all, the draft of Richard's will. "This," I said, holding up the papers for everyone to see, "is who Emily really is." The room erupted into a flurry of whispers and gasps. I began reading aloud, starting with the journal entries. The language was cold, calculating, and utterly damning. I spared no detail, my voice growing stronger with every word. Richard's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Karen, that's enough," he barked, but I kept going. "And here," I said, holding up the will, "is her endgame. Not love, not companionship, but money. That's what she's after." Emily shot up from her chair, her face a mask of fury. "How dare you," she hissed. "You went through my things?" "Oh, I dared," I replied, my tone ice cold. "Because you brought this fight into my home, Emily. You made it personal." She turned to Richard, her voice dripping with indignation. "Are you really going to let her humiliate me like this?" But Richard wasn't looking at her. His eyes were glued to the documents in front of him, the realization of his own gullibility sinking in. The room fell into a tense silence as Emily grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. The guests, clearly uncomfortable, began murmuring their goodbyes and making excuses to leave. When the last guest had gone, it was just Richard and me, standing alone in the aftermath. "How could you do this, Karen?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. I turned to him, my heart pounding but my resolve unwavering. "How could I?" I repeated, my voice rising. "No, Richard, how could you? How could you disrespect me, humiliate me, and throw away 30 years of marriage for her?" He didn't answer, couldn't answer. "For years, I put you first," I continued, the anger spilling out of me. "I gave up my dreams, my independence, and my dignity to keep this family together. And what did I get in return? A husband who saw me as an accessory, not a partner. Well, Richard, that ends tonight." I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of the room, leaving him standing there, surrounded by the shattered remains of his perfect image. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected: freedom. Leaving wasn't easy, but staying would have been unbearable. The morning after the dinner party, I woke up to the quiet realization that my life as I knew it was over, and strangely, that gave me a sense of peace. Richard was still sulking, pacing the house like a man who'd lost his kingdom. I didn't need his apologies or excuses, I needed freedom. So, I packed a suitcase. "Where are you going?" he asked, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. His tone was neither pleading nor apologetic, just bewildered, as if the idea of me leaving had never crossed his mind. "I don't know yet," I replied honestly. "But I'll figure it out. For years, I thought the foundation of my life was my marriage. I thought that without Richard, I'd crumble. But in that moment, I realized I was made of much sturdier stuff." I walked past him without looking back. I moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched, but I loved it. It was a blank canvas, just like my life. Paul was my first visitor. He brought a potted plant as a housewarming gift, a fern, hardy and resilient. "Figured it'd suit you," he said with a smile. Over tea, we talked about everything: my marriage, my doubts, my fears. Paul listened, never judging, never interrupting. "You've got a lot of life left, Karen," he said. "Don't waste it living someone else's version of who you're supposed to be." His words stuck with me. I started making small changes at first. I enrolled in a cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I joined a local book club, where I met women who'd lived through their own storms and come out stronger. Then came the bigger steps. I applied for a part-time job at an art gallery, a place I'd visited often in my younger years. To my surprise, they hired me. Being surrounded by creativity, by people passionate about beauty and expression, awakened something inside me that I'd buried long ago. Paul and I became closer, but our relationship wasn't rushed or defined by labels. He was a friend, a confidant, and, in time, perhaps something more. For now, it was enough to know I had someone who saw me, and not as an accessory or an afterthought, but as a person with dreams, flaws, and worth. As the months passed, I discovered the joy of living for myself. I traveled to a nearby coastal town one weekend, walking along the beach and letting the salty breeze fill my lungs. I painted a sunrise for the first time in decades. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Richard, on the other hand, tried to win me back. There were flowers, letters, even promises of counseling. But I knew better. He wanted the comfort of the life we'd built, not the work it would take to fix what he'd broken. I met with him once, at his insistence. "I miss you," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I miss who we used to be," I replied. "But that's gone, Richard. And I found someone I hadn't seen in a long time in me. I won't lose her again." The last time I saw Emily was in a grocery store. She looked as polished as ever, her cart filled with gourmet items. She glanced at me briefly, her expression unreadable, and then turned away. I felt no bitterness, only a quiet satisfaction. My story wasn't about her. It wasn't even about Richard anymore. It was about me, about learning that it's never too late to choose yourself. For me, it took a betrayal to rediscover myself, and while the journey wasn't easy, it was worth every step. My story is a reminder that it's never too late to choose yourself, to rewrite your narrative, and to embrace a life filled with authenticity and joy. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and empower. Share this story with someone who might need a little encouragement today. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below and let us know how Karen's journey made you feel. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to drop a like to show your support. It helps us bring more content like this to you. Until next time, remember, every ending is just the beginning of a new story. Thank you for being part of this one.